The following podcast is sponsored by Basico. At Basico, we understand your needs and pain points. Our expertise in CFO services, legal, finance IT, and people and payroll helps drive your business forward by inspiring change and challenging norms. We believe in deep explorative discussions and critical angles, the same spirit that fuels the Only Constant podcast hosted by our own Lasse Rindom. Discover more about Basico's vision and services at basico.dk. And if you like what you hear in this episode, please don't hesitate to share it with a friend. And now Lasse, take it away.
You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Phil Lee, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi, Kathy, and welcome to The Only Constant. I'm thrilled to have you with me today. You are leading the AI strategy and an AI ambassador at Workday globally. So this is, quite a cool guest to have on The Only Constant. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored and thrilled to get to join your line of such incredible guests and all the insights that you bring to the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I think you are a catch as well. So you are definitely improving the lineup. So thank you for that. But Kathy, I've been wondering a little bit, what do you think is the connection between agency and purpose? And what does this connection mean for how we use AI agents? I mean, adoption is good, obviously for, autonomous systems. But what about dependency? Are we even thinking enough about that?
Yeah, agency and purpose, that's really what's been dominating my work and my research and my conversations the last year in some sense as it relates to AI, but actually for many years in terms of just how technology impacts our lives as a whole. And let's first talk about them separately, then I'll bring them together. Having a sense of purpose, there's been books, philosophers writing about this, having that sense of purpose as a human being, as society in the world is what drives us, right, to move forward in life. And then when you extend that purpose to not just our broad world, like what is my purpose in life, right? But also like, what is the purpose of this activity I'm going to do today? What is the purpose of like cooking a meal for my family? What's the purpose of me doing a really good performance review for my colleague? What is the purpose of these interactions and actions we have every day, in addition to our broad, like what is the purpose of my life and what's the purpose of a company, etc. It's what drives us to live, to do what we have next. And then you introduce to that this idea of agency, which is our ability and power to work towards that purpose, right? Like how much agency do I have as an individual to decide what food is put on the table? How much agency do I have to use the tools or devices or whatever I have at my disposal to support my employees at work? Like what is my agency? What control do I have? And where it comes together right now is we have technology literally with the name agents in them, like AI agents, that can take on some of that agency for us with the promise of perhaps better efficiency, better outputs. We can discuss more of what AI can do to help or perhaps distract sometimes in our lives. But when you have tools now that claim to take on agency, what is our own personal agency to then determine what agency do you want to keep and what agency do you want to give away? Because at some point, are you giving away a certain amount of agency that then takes away from the purpose of either that action or that broader purpose of life or that broader purpose of our company or society. So for me, those two go hand in hand, and there's such an interesting intersection to explore. Like, how much agency do you keep to maintain that purpose that we need to have?
But what if you go agency without purpose, right? What then happens to the human purpose? I think that's I'm getting ahead of myself here, because I thought about the whole the agency without purpose. We're 3 years in, right? And everyone's talking we just need agents. There's so much focus on technology and AI right now, right? That I think also before this whole AI agent, explosion, we were discussing purpose and meaning and whys. Every technology project has to start with a why. All that, and are we now just moving away from that and just moving AI agents into everything? And what actually happens to the human purpose if we remove the purpose from the agency? Do you understand what I'm trying to get at here?
Yes. What happens? That's such a important question to ask every day, right? What happens to the human purpose, and are we then solving for the wrong problem that doesn't ultimately get us to the purpose? So, for example, let's put aside technology. Let's say at the end of the day, we want to connect with our family members when we get home, however your family member, whatever makeup of your family is, and you sit down for dinner together. And perhaps part of that is cooking together and then setting the table together and then cleaning the dishes together. And some might call those tasks mundane or extra, and you might want help, but others might call that time together also equally fulfilling as the eating the meal part, right? All the preparation, all that. That's
being family, right? That is being family, isn't it?
And that's coming together and and so if the purpose is to connect with your family, if you take away the quote, if you make it more efficient, if you will, to just have a meal on the table, then you take away the preparation, the connection, the clean, all these other pieces, right? That then ultimately gets to the purpose of that meal, which is to connect. So the purpose in that case is not just to be fed, is to connect with one another. However, if there is a scenario where your main purpose right then is to feed and go, let's say it's the morning, everyone's rushing out the door, you want the most efficient way to get food in mouth, in belly, out the door.
Yes.
And so, but that's the point. But you have to understand both the broad purpose, but also the exact purpose of that scenario, because in some cases, you might not, that isn't the right time for that connection time. That if it's the morning and everyone's rushing, that right time is to find the quickest way from A to B. And so I think of those examples when I translate it to technology and productivity tools. Sometimes you might want the fastest way to get a piece of code out. You might want the fastest way to get a quick memo out. But other times, the process of crafting the right memo or the right copy for a company-wide event or something, that process with your team is just as important as the end product.
Yeah, so the convenience the convenience sort of becomes, the problem is that convenience takes over and becomes, the norm, or, so we only go for that. And we never, I think Eva Sorowska said that in an episode from December that, if you don't have friction, you're in a free fall, right?
Yes. And there's actually just the start of this year, it's the beginning of the year, people have their predictions and stuff. And there's actually been quite a few write-ups around the year of adding friction.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a response to the year, the 2 years of only efficiency. So of course there are places we want more efficiency. And of course there are places we want to reduce friction. But also, of course, there are places where
you want to buy vinyls,
friction,
right? Yeah, you want to go out and buy a vinyl, right? That's super friction.
Yes, exactly. You might want a vinyl, even if you can within seconds get that music.
Yeah.
And then there's a nuance. I mean, some people might say when they listen to vinyl, it feels differently. And so there's all these components. And I'll also put a tangent a bit. It also goes back to me for the classic question of what problem are we solving for?
Yeah.
And for me, problem and purpose go together. Are we solving for the problem of just getting from point A to point B, and you want the fastest route possible? Maybe sometimes. I'm not saying that's never the case. Sometimes you might want that. But if your problem you're solving for is something else, maybe it is to get someone a better experience at work. Maybe it's for the company to have a better supply chain. Like all these things that like we prioritize. And you don't focus on the actual problem and understand the purpose of it. We might be solving for the wrong thing because then we're now using these tools to maximize for efficiency and speed and quickness. And then you remove all the friction. But sometimes those friction points are a good thing.
But they're also fluctuating. Right? It's also fluctuating, right? The want, the purpose. So we're solving for it now. We fixed it today. But then in 2 years, Spotify solved all of that. But now you want vinyl, and Spotify can't fix that.
Yeah,
so you see, there's nothing static here. Everything is a moving piece, right? There's this relativity all around, right?
And if you don't constantly ask ourselves, what's the purpose of this? And then what power and agency do we have to handle that? We'll just lose sight of what we're solving for. And that's the greatest, you might just listen to music streaming, but then it turns out vinyl is what people want. Like there's so many examples of this. It's just your podcast is the only constant, right? Like that's not it's something that keeps changing, but we'll get to the question later. What is the only constant?
Don't spill it now. That's become a theme lately. People are starting to spill their constants. In the beginning, like, that's the only constant. It was like, I want to get to that question. Okay, this is weird. But okay, so now, this is our, the want and purpose is all fluctuating, and we have agency without purpose. We can't have that. We need purpose and all. How are you approaching this exceptionally complex issue in Workday?
Yeah. So one thing that drew me to the company, two things. One is that I love the space of just the critical services that are the foundation of what everyone else does. It might not be the thing that is top of mind for everyone, but it's like the backbone. Like what are all the things that are like the backbone of how organizations, companies, and society work? It's why I spent time in the US government. It's why I teach. It's like these foundational pieces. And so Workday, for those who are unaware, is a human resources, finance, and planning company with AI and agents a part of core of what we do. And what that means is how we pay people, how we understand how people work, how we handle their performance reviews, how we just understand all the components of how work happens, goes through the company. And I think because of that, it's always been a highly regulated entity. Like the space of human resources and finances globally is a space that has governance and rules by default. Unlike, I've been in places that have been like consumer technologies, et cetera, where you build something, you put it out into the world, you can do it tomorrow, it doesn't matter. Yeah. But we're in a place where understanding human agency and control and risk and governance, these are all things that are core to the product. So I think having that baseline is already important. One of the 6 core values at Workday is integrity, just because it has to be, because these are people's livelihoods that we deal with. So I bring that up because it allows already for a really solid starting point, right, of control and power. And so moving on from that, what we say is, all right, let's think about all the components of work. And one of my colleagues, Athena Karp, who's the founder of a company called Higher Score that was acquired by Workday, incredible thought leader and founder, discusses this concept of like a chief work officer, like someone who understands all the components of work itself. And then we think through, well, how does an AI or technology in general layer on top of that? Like which parts of work is technology really good to make better? And which parts you're like, actually, that part, like the technology isn't good at changing that. And we might not want to. So there are parts of, let's say, doing precise financial records, for example, where we're like, no, that part is better for human oversight. But there are parts where you might have hundreds, thousands of financial documents, but you want to be able to ask a question like, what question should I even ask? Because financial records are really complicated. Or you might want to ask a question of your like 40,000 documents to find irregularities in your supply chain. Like these are things that technology is good at. And then there are things that a person is better at. And so we're constantly asking ourselves those questions in the company, inside our product and I think that's what every product team is like, what part of this is technology better at, and we should apply it there. And then other parts we don't. And then within that within that framework would think about risk at all levels. And we have an incredible chief responsible AI officer, Kelly Trindle, who's a social scientist by training. So she understands how people move about in the world and helps us think through different tiers of risk. And within each of those tiers, how we handle human intervention and mitigation is also very different. So for us, there's no product development without deeply understanding how people use the product. And then deeply understanding how, if something goes unplanned, what do we do next?
There's a couple of things here, I think about, what it can do. First of all, you said, what can it do? And there's obviously the market is moving so fast. Are you comfortable knowing what it can do and what it can't do all the time? Or how do you feel about that, Kathy?
Yes. Yes. And I mean, I think the job of any company that works in high responsibility, high impact organizations. What I mean by that is if you're a company and you're responsible for people's well-being and livelihood in some way, maybe your healthcare, maybe your financial records, et cetera, your job as the tech company is to understand the technology landscape, right? Building stuff is one part of it, but I'm a computer scientist by training and I've been building software for over 20 years. Part of my job is to always stay up to date with all the tools and their capabilities. But then come to my teams who have domain expertise, who are maybe they understand financials, maybe they understand higher ed, and we pair together and we're like, what's possible and what's not. But my job is to stay abreast, and that's a call to our job is to understand that and to keep staying abreast.
Yeah, but that's your job, right? But do you see the post from Andrew Karpathy a couple of weeks back where he said, I feel like I'm falling behind. So do you see that from Andrew? Yeah. He was like on vibe coding. He was like, I think it's moving too fast. Don't you feel that way as well?
Yeah, Andrew's great. He has a lot of great. I mean, a lot of us have learned from him over the years as well. Yes and no. I mean, I think you constantly stay up to date what's going on. You follow other people, you follow the latest research, and then you just keep trying, right? He knows he's falling behind with vibe coding because he's trying it. And he is like, but each time you feel that way, you learn something new versus the people who never try. And so they don't even know they're falling behind because they haven't had the chance to really test out. So I think to some extent, you stay abreast about the latest that's coming out with foundation models, the capabilities, and then in whether it's sandbox environments or test environments, you test out how they might work in your specific domain. So for us, it's HR, finance, planning. We have customer data that we have privacy and security controls over, that we respect, and they maintain their control over their sets over there. And then we have areas where we're able to test what these new models or these new capabilities can do in our systems. And I think that's how you stay up to date. You just keep constantly trying. And I think in a different era, maybe a few years ago, technology was changing much more slowly. So you can try new things more slowly. But now I think if you create an environment where your teams are constantly trying and testing, you might not be able to stay at the speed of everything, but pretty close. And I'll also add to Andre's point, this era is different because the tools are capable of basically creating new tools. Yeah. Right. We see that with
sounds
Claude
dystopian
Code,
as well, right?
Yeah, we're I think Claude Code, this is January 21st, 2026, and Claude Code just got announced. And I forget the exact details, but some of it is the tool itself created itself. And so that creates another level of speed.
It sounds like you're making a dystopian sci-fi.
Well, it's speed and unpredictability now. You're just finding things. So it's hard, but I think
Claude Code made another Claude Code and we're all doomed. Yeah. We're all hiding in shelters now. We run out of food. Yeah. Kathy, can you share anything? Do you have more water?
You just don't stop. You just have to keep trying and keep testing out new tools. There's a great podcast, How AI, run by Clairvaux. And I actually, whenever I listen to it, there's these snippets she releases really frequently of people just trying new things. Yeah. So whenever things feel overwhelming, I'm like, it's okay, just keep trying. There's a whole community out there of other people trying and seeing if it's for your domain or not. So,
but you also said, if people are falling behind, but you're falling behind, but you don't really know you're falling behind. And the problem is also maybe I'm thinking a lot about that actually. Can you be falling behind if you don't know? Can everyone be falling behind at the same time? Because if people are not moving with it, is the world really changing? This it's sort of your impact is something people do, right? It's not just something technology does on its own. So and I think that's also why I'm extremely sympathetic to what I wrote down, that this is my own framing, that you're making foundational models do foundational work, right? You can use that if you want to, but I'm actually extremely sympathetic to that, because that's also the focus that I have in my everyday job, to try to figure out how can we make people not take their processes to AI, but maybe get AI into their processes, right? And it's sort of that focus as well, to actually make the change so people are not falling behind on the actual change, right, Kathy? That's your focus, isn't it?
Yeah. That concept of how do you bring AI into your process and not just take your process to AI, you made me think of so now, maybe about almost 8 years ago, a group of my colleagues and I at the MIT Media Lab and the Harvard Berkman Klein Center, there was this Ethics and Governance of AI fellowship. And we produced something called AI in the Loop. And it was a spin on the human in the loop concept. And actually, since then, Afua Bruce, another incredible scholar, also has been talking about AI in the loop as well. And whereas we normally think about where do people fit into these AI systems, it's such a common, like the human in the loop concept is it's studied everywhere. It actually should be where AI fits into our processes, right? Like we're humans first, and there are places where AI can make better. I think at this point, a lot of us have used it in some way, and some of us have used AI without even knowing, right? Like all the tools we use, maps, searches, like we've been using AI for a long time.
But that's the point, right? How can we make AI invisible, right? In maps, it's invisible there. The problem is, how can we make AI something people use? No, how can we make people unaware that they're using AI? For me, that's, how can we make them indirect consumers of it? That's the goal, isn't it?
I think in some ways it is, and in other ways it might. I think in lots of ways it is. And I would have said that is 100% yes. But then there are also scenarios where I think with this moment of going back to agency and control, how much agencies, like these technology systems, can get access to and can have. Like the advancements in technology has made it so that these tools, if you actually look at Gemini just launched like personal intelligence, can get access to all of our different systems. And then we can tell it to take action to some extent. It changes the invisibility of, let's say, like using a map to go somewhere.
Yeah,
right?
you want this to be
something
explicit.
Now you're actually, because of the level of agency and control and visibility it has, including being labeled like an agent, there is, I think, some balance of knowing or seeing that it's something that is generated in ways that I think are different than like using a search tool that has AI, or in other ways AI has been embedded into our lives. I think we are in a different moment where some of the seeing the AI tool. I will say, like a year ago, I was actually hoping for the world where we stopped talking so much about AI and it was like embedded and just embedded responsibly in different parts of our lives. I do think agents and how much agency they take on makes it so that there is some balance of surfacing that something might be AI or generated.
Yeah, but I completely agree with that. The explicitness is... No, yeah, okay. It sounds like I just said invisible, but I agree with I agree with that as well, Kathy.
Yeah.
So I stand corrected. Maybe that's maybe.
No,
what
I know what you mean though.
Yeah,
I think because when I hear you talk, Lasse, I think like it's like it should be part of our lives in a seamless way without everyone saying like AI. It's like so to like saying AI all the time. And that's a much better experience, right?
Yeah, Copilot for everything. 100%. Let's just not call it that. Let's just call it Workday. Let's just call it,
correct.
It can be really annoying.
And it's like an advancement of the technology. Yeah. It has AI in it somewhere. And it is
technology. It is just as much technology as any other technology. And, having some kind of, understanding of that, right? The machine. But also, I think that with the explicitness, I thought about this Google Maps thing. I remember someone saying once that, you have a recommendation system when it's telling you, do you want to take this other route, right? Go here instead. But then suddenly it starts just taking you there. And then it's explicit AI, right? Then it's hidden. Then it's an agent just taking over your life, right?
Yes.
And we're
actually seeing that as well in this moment of agents where there's like a gradual progression where at first it's like, oh, I noticed that you have these typical, like these typos, or I noticed that let's say I'm thinking about like coding and software engineering. Yeah. Like I noticed that whenever you do a commit, there are like these bugs that come up. Do you want me to replace it every time?
Yeah.
And you might be like, no, this is like a bug that I want to review every time. So no. And so it's slowly, or you're like, actually, yes. And so every time it takes on a little bit more agency, if you will. It's to your point about the maps where it's like, here's an alternate route. And if you keep choosing yes, it'll be like, oh, this person actually is okay with that. Whereas if you're like me and you live in, I live in an area that people often say, we have roads that are made for horses. This is the New England, Boston area in the US. And our roads are all like, they crisscross in funny ways. They are very complicated. Some of them aren't even listed. To the point where some of the locals, we don't always trust any technology that comes in because it doesn't always capture the nuance of traffic patterns and the weird ways and so I might actually always say no. And so, but like we're seeing that as a designed feature for organizations where they have agents that can take on full autonomy in some ways, or maybe not full, like a lot of autonomy, but then along the way, you kind of teach it how much autonomy you want, and then it makes the decisions.
But then it also becomes, if you ask those questions all the time, and you're always taking the same box saying yes, then it becomes like the cookie disclaimer, right? It's like, oh, so annoying. No one's reading it anyway. No one's reading the it becomes something like that.
Yeah.
Right? That's also a problem, right?
For those, I teach about the cookie disclaimer. For those who are unfamiliar, the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, came up with these privacy these privacy guidelines. One was organizations have to tell you if they're using cookies, which is just a way to track your activity online. And what companies ended up doing is, for those who are listening, if you remember, almost overnight, every time you went to a new website years ago, it was FYI, there's a cookie, do you accept? And what Lasse say is everyone was just clicking OK because they want to get to their website.
It's still there, right? But only if you go to new websites, and it's like, and you're just clicking OK, you're not reading it, right? And that's like over implementation, right? But Kathy, you also mentioned, of course, right, that it's really difficult when you work in critical processes, and I've spoken about this also with SAP and Business Central and other software providers before. That it's difficult to move fast and break things when people depend on you, right? And so how do you feel, affiliated with the Silicon Valley people who was just going crazy on that?
I've never subscribed to moving fast and breaking things. It's for me the equivalent of every time you want to improve a bridge, you have to break it and build a new one or something. And you're like, actually, if you're a really good architect, designer, engineer, like really good, and I've worked with a lot of the top in the world, you know how to move fast and then find that line where you can move fast and do it responsibly and respect the people along the process and solve the problem in a better way. And so I think where companies are in the enterprise being companies that work on critical services for other large organizations that are the backbone of how we operate. I 100% believe, and I see this now, when you hire the right team that includes people who understand the technology, people who understand the domain, so maybe it's HR, finance, higher ed, planning, people who understand society and how people operate, people who understand research, understand how to go out into the field and understand just if you were to put any chat interface in front of someone, how will they react and what are they going to want to do and how comfortable they feel? Like if you have all that together, you can move fast because anytime you have a question of should I launch this, you have all at once someone in legal, someone in social science, someone in engineering, someone in like all come together within like minutes or an hour and like come at the problem really holistically. But
this is governance, right? Governance and architecture, that becomes a fast trajectory, right? Like a highway.
I think that goes to another thing I believe, which is like anyone who ever says governance slows things down, I'm like, you've obviously never had good governance. It's not like governance isn't just like laws that you don't like. It's actually like this good governance is good software engineering practices. So then your team now can move so fast because, and I've experienced this on my teams where they're like, I don't have to worry about security guidelines because you've laid it all out. So I know what I can work with. I don't have to worry about design principles on like what is accessible and the right colors for different regions because you've given me those guidelines and like so you can move so much faster. And if you don't like the word governance, replace it with like product and software guidelines. I don't like whatever it is that works for like the team. We can move so much faster. So it goes back to just, the concepts of having strong interdisciplinary teams that truly are interdisciplinary, where people at different disciplines have an equal seat at the table, not just that engineering is better than other fields or however, which is the general ethos of a lot of companies. You move so fast when you have these different perspectives and you're so much more creative. It's like, I think back to, so many people have referenced the Steve Jobs, like sitting in a classroom where he discovered new font styles that then he later introduced into the Mac. And we're able to have different like letterings for fonts and like, how do you get to those quick ideas? Because you just now have someone who like studied calligraphy in the room with, and like you can move so much faster when you have these, and you don't have to break things because at the same time, those people in the room, if you have a good partnership, can quickly tell you, hey, if you open up a platform like that, did you know that like teenagers can also use it? And we have a history the last 15 years of what happens when teenagers use tools and they're not ready, right? Like these are, because that's a real question, right? Like with teenagers using chatbots and calling, probably like, some might say, I never predicted that. I'm like, what I'll always tell my students, because I teach a class, there's someone in the world that probably has thought about it. They might not be in your direct group of people. They might not be like other engineers like you. They might not be other political scientists like you. They might not be in that bubble. But to say like, I never thought that this is what would happen if like kids use the platform, or I never thought this is how news would spread if we just open up the internet. And you're like, a historian probably has thought of it.
Yes.
So I always like when I form a team, I think about what's the makeup of it that can allow me to move super fast, because I don't have to reach out to some I will likely probably sometimes reach out to some expert, but like a lot of the different broad expertise is there.
You don't want to go back problems. Either. You want to move, and then you don't want to have to go back again because something you didn't think of and something hit you in the head.
Oh
right?
yeah, that debt is we talk a lot about technical debt in engineering, right? Where you're messy with how you build something, and then you develop all this technical debt. Oh, there's a ton of debt that happens too with society and government, like these like issues that you might create, and one might just be reputation issues, but another might be a legal matter if you don't take this into account. So like if I were like for any team starting, it's like, how do you think about that in advance to not gather that debt when you go and like free the teams to build really, really quickly, but they're also all crystal clear on, this is a podcast, but like I'll use governance in quotes, governance around how to build. So you can 100% move quickly, not break critical services. Sometimes you break things that don't work anymore. Sure. Let's get rid of stuff that shouldn't have been there.
But do you feel the same about regulation, Kathy, then on a societal level?
What about regulation?
Yeah, the regulation is the same, like a sort of societal governance, and it's also good for moving fast. How do you feel about that?
Yes, I think if we were to make a blanket statement, regulation is good on a societal level to give us guidelines. I think where sometimes things break down is where we go back into our silos, and the people who understand their field, whether it's regulating clean water or whether it's regulating harms of technology platforms online, where if people don't show up with like domain subject matter, real expertise to help with the regulation, then you have regulators making rules and enforcements with the information, whatever information they have.
Yeah,
and these like lawmakers try, like that's why they reach out to lobby, they reach out to experts, lobbyists, academics. I ran the National AI Advisory Committee in the United States, which advised the White House and president on AI for a bit of time. And there's a lot of work that happens to the outreach, right? But we have to really make sure that gets into the regulation. Otherwise, you might, like, I don't know this. I'll just give a hypothetical. Like if somebody who came up with the cookie part of the GDPR also thought about the design of how that was implemented, and maybe you might say, well, it's regulation. You don't want to actually dictate how people do it. But it's like, we need some level of, so yes, I'm a firm believer that throughout history, we've seen regulation do good in the world, whether it's clean waters, safer roads, safer, well, we're all figuring out what that looks like for technology online, but like by extension, safer technologies that can mitigate as much harm as possible for the people that use them. And we need, this is like a call to anyone who's never paid attention to regulation. Like we need you at the table to help shape the regulation. And then we need the lawmakers. Actually, I find it less like, I think the lawmakers are always reaching out to try and get more information. It's more like the experts coming to the table and like in good faith, not just in self-interest faith, like in good faith, share the right details of what it's like to be in practice.
But that's also what you said, if you had the right epistemology, for the epistemic understanding, the evaluation, lawmakers had that. I spoke about it in an episode I just recorded about lawmaker epistemology, because, what do they know? What do they evaluate? The same things you're talking about here to some extent, right? But also saying, I have spoken about before that you need regulation, but you also need standards, right? And that's what you're talking about with cookies, right?
Yes,
so if we can couple those things, domain expertise from the lawmakers with some standards, then law becomes not just you're not allowed to do this, but how do I implement it? I don't know. But it becomes, this is how you should approach the implementation to some extent, right?
You need all the pieces. Like I'm glad you brought that up. There's the regulation, which I refer to as like, that's like the hard line, right? Like it's written in regulation in either like a federal level, a state level, a local level, countries around the world. It's like the legal rules.
Destructive, and then
there's standards on how people do it, but there's also standards can be like, Electronic Frontier Foundation came together and like a cohort of actors came together and came up with standards that the whole field agrees to use. Like those are just as powerful, right? Like it's like a different kind of lever. And then there are also, the other one that I think is also really powerful is the companies that are the big players in the field that have a ton of influence. I mean, right now in the AI space, there's only a handful of them. When they come up with standards and practices that they use internally, and they release those out, a lot of organizations will adopt and adapt or even straight up copy. We see this happens in tech companies all the time. Think of like the biggest iconic tech companies, and I've worked at some of them. They make it so that they put out guidelines, and that the smaller companies, medium companies just adopt their like AI safety rules, their like software engineering lifecycle practices. That's not regulation, and it's maybe different from standards, but it's also another way to influence how things get built.
So, and you also said the word tech debt. Sorry, I'm moving around on this as well, but I think Kate O'Neill said in an episode 50, that debt is always when you believe in a good future, right? Then you make debt. You believe the future will be better, so you're okay with making some debt, right? That's on a personal level, but also on a company level. You only take up debt if you believe you can pay it back. Can we pay back all the tech that we are building right now?
I'll go back to actually the premise of, I do think there is a bet on the future when we take out debt. I also think there's a world where we see debt happen when you move quickly and want something to happen, whether it's like your personal life or at work, and you don't know what the future is. and some organizations might not even care, but you're moving quickly enough. Or you see organizations where they don't understand the magnitude of the debt. It's almost like if you were to go to a loan shark and you don't really know the magnitude, you just thought you were doing something and you're like borrowing. So you're making like some decision on tech infrastructure, like it's not as a big deal. It actually has this big cascading effect that ends up being like really expensive long-term because you didn't put in the right infrastructure to begin with.
Governance.
Or you make decisions about not having governance in your AI systems and all this harm happens, right? And like this cause. So I think in some sense there is you hope for a good future, which is one world. But I think there's also the world where there's just not enough thought into the future period. And we're just like moving fast and then the rest will come. And I think both of those create debt to some extent. And the only way out of it is to keep chiseling away.
But you must also in Workday, because I think I haven't spoken with any software leader or yet who hasn't felt the sort of the pressure from higher ups to make some debt in this AI craze. Haven't you felt that as well at all?
No, I think as I hear you ask that question, I don't feel like our teams feel a pressure to create debt.
Just make some AI. Yeah. Let's get some AI now, right?
Let's get some AI quickly. There is the push to make AI, but I think go back to what I said earlier. I think because fundamentally we're a business of these critical systems. We'll get there, and we are. We're launching a ton of agents, and we're launching a completely new interface for all of Workday. And it's quite exciting. And I think part of that is not the pressure to create debt while you do it, mainly because it's this culture of these are critical services, don't mess them up. Like we want to jump on what's critical for AI, and there's a lot of AI that can completely change the HR and finance experience. And there's a core business that people rely on where they just want to count how many employees they have, they want to pay people, they want to do some planning. And I think there was always permission to be okay to not break those things. Like don't break those things and innovate. So that makes like for a balance. And I would say some of our peers are like that. I think there are probably some other companies that are more in the realm of let's take on more debt and break things. But I think even hear you ask that question out loud. I don't think there's been that pressure to create unnecessary debt in the name of riding an AI train.
No, but you see the challenge, right? It is there. It is out there, and it's difficult, right?
It's
everyone's
totally
like,
there.
oh,
It's
there's
like
a startup coming they're just doing crazy shit, right? And we can't move fast.
The pressure is there. It's like when you're scared of being irrelevant, do you make decisions that might be very expensive later, right? Actually, I don't know. I literally just thought of this analogy, but some of my parent friends and I would joke that if you're in the early postpartum phase, for all of you, any of you have kids, there are all these advertisements for like things that help your baby sleep, or like how to help you sleep, or like food. Like there's like so many advertisements, and you're making these decisions under duress because you're exhausted, and you end up creating a lot of like, in your case, debt, whether it's debt of space because you didn't need it in the first place, or just monetary debt. And I think I think that analogy is relevant in the sense of it is a moment of everyone needs to have AI. We have to rush to build the next AI thing. But it's okay to not buy stuff you don't actually need. And that's where it goes back to find the right people in the room to be like, yo, it's okay to take like a beat for like a week and just decide if we need that or not. And then decide what's a new architecture or infrastructure we need for our organization, and then make a better decision. It's okay to do all those things.
I'd like to know now, actually ask you a little bit about what you're actually then building for Workday with these agents, right? But I'd like to contextualize it a little bit as well, right? So in a recent episode with Laura Jeffers Greenberg, I spoke to her about how collaboration is actually very ambiguous as well. How humans and organizations are not clearly defined endpoints, even though endpoints, AI sort of have made us all endpoints with language. That came out weird, but AI has sort of made us all endpoints because it's a language model, right? So it can work with us as human endpoints. So how do we sort of optimize enterprise software suites for this? When most of these are not just closed and confined in our own, but are made of more and more external interdependencies as well, and the ambiguity is just extremely high, and AI is even though it enables us, it also it doesn't mean that the world it operates in is clearly defined still. Am I making myself a little bit clear? Am I posing this question completely wrong?
Yeah. So it sounds like you're saying the world of AI is unclear, partly because the outputs of it can be unclear and how it's applied can be in here.
No, but mainly that the most of the things that we're trying to interact with are not necessarily clearly defined. So you don't necessarily own all the things that you are interacting with. The company you are in is not just an enterprise architecture, but a cross-company architecture between different companies, and it's also made out of a lot of humans who are also ambiguous endpoints, right? And the only thing that kills an AI is ambiguity to some extent, right? So how are we actually moving with this? How are we building agents that make meaning in big enterprise suites, and also enterprise suites like Workday that is supposed to collaborate probably and in effect with a lot of other systems as well. People are not just Workday everywhere, but Workday is always often in joining up with other software suites as well. It has to be integrated. How will your agents work in that? What agents are you building, Kathy? How are you changing the world?
Yeah. So this is another great question. This is the year, for those following different trends, this is the year that a lot are saying is the year of, we had the year of large language models and chat. We had the year of agents. This is the year of agents, connectivity, and context. And and I believe this as well, where when you have agents super in silos, you're only solving for what you know. But the promise of these technologies is you're able to go to something. Right now it's a chat interface, but maybe it's multimodal, maybe it's text, maybe it's something, or maybe it's voice, something else. And it connects all the different complicated systems behind the scenes and understands me in the context that I'm in. So maybe I'm an executive at a tech company, or maybe I'm in my personal context over here trying to plan understands the exact context of where I am and connects pieces together. And that's where we're going to be seeing partnerships in enterprise. So for us, it's Microsoft, Snowflake, Salesforce, et cetera. So for those unfamiliar with the enterprise space, these are other just large enterprise companies. And we make the agreement on the back business end to say, hey, a customer might own all of our stuff. Let's work together so that if they're okay with it, we can connect and give them a better insight. Otherwise, they have to figure out how to extract data from all of our systems and then do something separate and then do something else. And so there's a lot of partnerships going on. I think that's one. I think that another one is
that's super interesting, actually, I think, these partnerships.
Yeah. I think the partnerships, and then another layer to the partnership is I also now lead open technology at Workday, and which is something I've been passionate about for many years in my time at Mozilla and others. But what you're seeing is, I'll just use one example, but there's many companies showing up for things like the Agentic AI Foundation, which is a part of the Linux Foundation, and they're showing up to contribute to MCP, which is the protocol that connects agents together. And Anthropic donated that protocol into the open source landscape. Yeah. And another way to explain the protocols is if you can think of if everyone built a bunch of really nice cars and they talked about how incredible their cars were. But then one day someone's like, oh wait, there are no roads for the cars to go from different places. MCP and these agent protocols are like that.
Like and for companies, airports for planes as well, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, similar, right? And companies are showing up in the open space that's outside their company walls to work on common protocols. So going back to our standards conversation, or common protocols together that the whole industry can work with. Then now if we all use MCP, and it might change to something else in a few years, then that'll be a way to connect in addition to the business and partner agreements behind the scenes of all these companies. as well. That has to happen, or else the value in enterprise, it'll be so limited, because any chief information officer today is handling dozens or many systems. And unless they can connect to each other with our individual context, we're not going to feel the same value that you maybe have felt in like the consumer tools, just using your favorite chat tool in your personal life.
I really enjoy this, but I also think that there's I really like these open technology and open architecture and the open frameworks, open source as well. But I think that the problem with this is also that if we do that, we also end up making something that becomes a little bit more static, right? And we just talk about how want and purpose is always changing, right? And fluctuating. So if Workday is now suddenly not just Workday being sort of a stable thing to run your critical processes, but Workday in conjunction with Salesforce and SAP and Microsoft and whatever has created this, even tighter grid on what we're doing and what is the purpose you can be doing. Are we then making, the largest monolith the world has ever seen?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that would be true if that was only the case. So I'll also add, we have, I'm so glad you pushed on that question, because we also have what we call the partner ecosystem in the marketplace, where it's not just the behemoths, it's small startups. It's, so my colleague Gabe is in charge of just like the enterprise open platform, which is companies can use the Workday APIs and the Workday tools to create and build on top of Workday and connect to their data, and then their customers can. So it's hundreds of smaller organizations and partners that work within this ecosystem, where, like, let's say a healthcare organization has purchased all these different services. It's all connected. So it's not just the big behemoths. It's a lot of smaller. Yeah,
but it's also, it's just tightly knitting them together in these protocols that will sort of be, if you change it, you are changing a whole chain. It's not necessarily reducing the complexity, right? It's actually to some extent adding to it, but also I think that one of the things that I've been seeing a lot, and I've also speaking about this on the podcast, is how that agents require a low ambiguity digital world, right? And that means that we have to sort of make these monoliths again with clear taxonomy and clear ontologies, and make them, sort of, unambiguously tied together. Whereas the dream is that we can spin up any kind of software all the time, right? And be super composable, like compostable, I've called it as well, right? And I see these two trends sort of, and what you said about moving with all the other vendors and the cross-company, initiative seems so to the monolith, which I really like, because I think you can't have these agents really working if they're in a Picasso painting, right? They have to be in a painting that makes sense, right? They have to be in a scenario that makes sense to them. They only exist digitally, these agents, right? So if it's all a mess, right, you get my point, right? So there's something moving against each other here, right? And you're working on now building that, but it just seems like there's this schisma going on in the world right now with technology, where you either go monolith or you don't go agent. You get my point?
Yeah. I think especially in the enterprise space, because a lot of organizations have been the main system for the data for a long time. The way to have agents add the value is to work with the place that owns the data sets, right? So maybe perhaps to some extent that is part of how enterprise finds value. It's the places that have been historically the systems of record, if you will. So we consider ourselves the second system of record for HR and finance. What does mean working with those entities, and maybe it is that it's the Workday monolith of like HR and finance, and we collaborate with others because we have been that monolith for HR and finance data, and then our partners will help us bring a lot more value to customers in that way. Yeah, that's a really interesting framing.
It's funny that you're saying it. You're saying it in a way that you're always like, I can see it in your face. You're always like embarrassed to say the monolith because it sounds so 90s evil, right? But I think
I actually, as I was talking to you, I'm like, no, it makes sense. Like for the monoliths to be the place where people like come to build on top, like build agents
But also
on
where
top
agents
of,
can
like,
navigate, like SAP is building this knowledge graph layer, so
Yeah.
you can navigate all of the tools. If you have only best of breed, composable architecture, your agents will not be able to find their way around.
Yeah. And in some ways, like, it's like if I were to think about my personal life, the monolith that is all of my digital online data for the last however long I've been online, like 25, 30 years. I want an entity that I trust to be able to go into that monolith and help me make sense of it, because it's so much stuff. So I don't know, maybe you could have another segment on unpacking monoliths, because I think this is a great topic of, it's not a bad, it's just, if you built yourself to be a monolith, which is...
It's also just world models, right? Building world models, right, for making decisions. You want agents to make decisions. You need to have a world model that's sort of, strict and connected, right? It's like saying, okay, let's take a road trip from the east of the US, the east coast to the west coast, right? Oh, but there's no roads, right? So we just have to go off road. There's no maps. Oh, where do we go? There's no stars. There's no. You don't have a compass. What are you going to do? How are you going to get there?
Right. I love that you brought up world models. It's great to see what Dr. Fei Li and now Jan LeCun are all out exploring. All
exactly.
It's a really, for those who haven't, it's a really exciting space to watch. But to your point, I mean, this is probably a tangent, but to your point about, like, if you're navigating across a country and you have to figure out how to get there, what's the right, and I think this is for debate, like, what's the right answer of how much digital technologies and tools should be a part of that to help you navigate across, versus how much of it is you're just going to go and follow signs and ask for directions and make it across. And what's better, and what's better, I think, is different for different people looking for, who have a different purpose.
Yeah, but it could be a lot of friction, right, for an AI agent going that way across the US, right? If it doesn't have any roads, it doesn't have, it has to ask all the time,
Right.
Efficiency gains. Anyway, it's but let's speak about that on my next question, which is more, your Workday operates, in critical processes. We spoke about that as a system of trust, right? And how do we embed these agents into what you're doing? Because you operate from HR in the one end, right, and all the way to something like adaptive planning, FP&A in the other. It's quite a big stretch of these foundational work, back office tasks. They might sound like something that's just in the back office support functions, but they're actually very different. These two things, right? And how do you actually build agents there?
Yeah. So I think part of building agents in our space is to break down all the components of work. And we've talked about, are agents better aligned with roles? So like a role of an analyst or a role of a hiring manager, or are they better aligned with the different kinds of tasks that each role has? Because a software engineer might be a software engineer, but they also might do some architecting. They might also do some design. And so there's different parts of that. And so we think about that as, when we're building an agent, is it to emulate a particular role, or is it just emulate like a different type of action in each one? And we've kind of landed in the middle. In some cases, there might be a financial analyst agent that understands financial records, and it might be like a financial analyst, like person, but it's actually just one part of their job. That financial analyst might also be talking to analysts in the field. They might also be holding meetings, right? They're like all these other components. And so we look at all the different business processes that we have. Some might be doing performance reviews for our Workday employees. And that's a big one, because a performance review historically is the employee writes down everything they've done, the manager looks at that, then like they go back and forth. But if you look at all the records that you have in a company, a lot of those answers are already there, right? So like why are we doing the extra work to pull it all together? So that's an example of, let's look at a business process. So that's like in the human resource space, but like in financial records and in planning, what's an example of?
Some would say, Workday adaptive planning is more, more some standard regression models, than building AI language model agents, right?
What do you mean for only standard regression models?
No, but it's more about, doing that to sort of predict where will these numbers go in the future. How will our budget look in the rolling forecast and stuff like that. So where does a language model fit here, right? That's what people will be asking.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of it is regression and looking at past to predict future, but some of it's also really understanding anomalies, surfacing anomalies inside records, and then using that for prediction. Some of them might also be bringing in external data points and bringing that into a model, if you will. And then on a particular cadence, be able to surface issues before they even arise. And then, because what if planning just went in a different direction completely? The whole point of planning is to understand what to do next and to forecast and predict what might you have ahead. But what if you get some of those insights in real time always and rethink planning as a whole? A great example is actually in financial records, where at the end of the month or end of a quarter, they're spending all this time looking at anomalies or issues for auditing and things like that. But you can probably, that's something where you can have a whole repository of historic anomalies and then more in real time go through and determine and flag issues, right? So I think we're seeing that's new as well. Instead of an end of month, end of quarter, end of year kind of planning, what if there's a more rolling capability inside enterprise and inside work that an agent can do and take action on a rolling basis, that it's capable now, whereas it couldn't before.
Or it could maybe, you could just send a quick mail to something and then it will generate a new scenario because it understands your question, what you wanted to do, and then you come back and get it, or you get it sent to you or something like that. That could also be an option, right?
Or you'll see that with this is a different thing because I'm in the software world, but it's there are things that before we just kind of had to wait for things to compile and wait for things to test. But then there are things now where it can surface stuff earlier and send an email, or even quickly mitigate pretty quickly. So I think it just changes. Planning is a great changes how we plan completely. And that's a space I think about a lot, where there's an iterative process for Workday where we think about a feature that we have for maybe will help you generate job descriptions, because that's something that LLMs are really good at. It takes all the historical information about job descriptions and just gives you a template. And that's iterative. But because of the new capabilities of companies connecting with each other, of not just large language models, but different kinds of models in general, what are ways where you just rethink the process completely? What if an employee, a potential employee, can connect with an employer without all those in-between processes of the resume and interviews and all that, because there's information that's already there, Did you
read AI 2041 by Kai-Fu Lee? Did you read that book? But he just predicts 10 different scenarios for the future, right? And one of them is one of the most unnerving one is where you have an insurance company who is tapped in. You can get a lower fee, on your insurance if you allow them to tap into your personal data, all of it, right? Because then they know who you are and they get some. But then the child starts dating someone in India, and then their fee goes up and they don't know why. And then they find out that's because that person could be inferred to have come from a bad caste in the past. So her family had bad history, right? And suddenly you were doing something. The bias of the machine would be interpreting things differently, right? It's not something like that we're talking about, right?
That's something you raise a really important question. It's part of my research, even before coming to Workday, of well-intentioned systems. Yeah. Or hopefully they're well-intentioned. And we'll assume in the scenario that they're well-intentioned systems that want to help you.
Yeah.
End up causing more harm because there is more access to information, and then that information is used to find out other information, then goes and causes, again, goes against the purpose. It goes against the purpose of what you were hoping it would do. And I actually think that's where data agreements with organizations and people are starting to come. But then data agreements are like the checkbox on the cookie screen, as you mentioned. It's like people just agree to use a product.
But these good but blind machines that end up being evil, right? That's the worst thing, almost, right? Where you knew the potential, but they weren't evil, right? They were just doing serving a purpose, like this one.
I mean, that's been, I think, the study of the ethical response technology space for the last decade. Machines that were designed for one purpose that end up doing something where the result is what we would deem as like evil, inappropriate, not okay for society, or some version of that. And sometimes the developers are like, whoa, I didn't mean to. Sometimes the developers say they don't care, which is even the worst. But like it causes, and I also think that's where the mitigation is just as important. So when you're building a system for which the usage of it or the output of it is unclear, so higher ambiguity, you and I were talking about low ambiguity, high ambiguity, but if there is any ambiguity, we also have to build in a system to address the outcome if it is not something that we actually want. Like that part of it is just as important as the building part. In a way that like testing used to be just as important, even though it wasn't prioritized as much as like software development, because it's not as fun, right? Like the testing part, the regular. It's why like companies came up with DevOps and site reliability engineers. They're like, oh, the people who fix things when things go wrong are just as important as the people who build things. And for us, what fixing things looks like also includes societal problems in addition to like technology problems. And we need to be prepared, or like, if there's a system, to your point, that then takes a person's information, looks at their family background, and goes after them and gives them like a negative response because it thinks in quotes, or it has like data from a lot of people that claims a certain caste is not okay, then that's not what we want.
It's actually even in the story, it's actually even inferring the caste because it doesn't know about caste, but it's inferring it because of the bad luck the family has had. And then they say this person is bad luck. It's a really interesting story. But I think also Serge Belongi said, and I really love that. That's what I'm inferring now from what you're saying, is what Serge Belongi on the podcast said, that he's been teaching people that digital twins, right? They also represent the data, and he's trying to make them physical all the time, saying this data, the bias in this data, imagine it's physical, that there's a societal, this is not just technology, there's a society and an impact on people from what we're doing. And we need to sort of be aware of that at all levels all the time. So it doesn't become this technology, metaverse, but actually becomes the real universe that we're sort of impacting, right?
Yes, 100%. And then if you want to extend that, it's the people who use your products, but also the people who might never have even heard of or will use something you build, for whom your system will also impact them.
Yeah.
So think about like tools and social media, people who might not ever be on the platforms, but because they exist, the information that's on there affects them.
Yeah, Cloudflare, right? We had tons of moments with them recently, right? No one knew about it a year ago, and then they had 3 breakdowns, and everyone knows what Cloudflare is. It's a worse example. I think the social media example is a way better. But it also leads me to ask you the question, Kathy. It's the reason why you said job descriptions. You're using AI for doing job descriptions. Are you also using it to evaluate job applicants? Because that is, the wasp nest, right, of HR systems, isn't it?
Not evaluate. So we acquired HireScore, an incredible company. What it does is it was founded on the premise that it's going to be a responsible AI company. And everything that they built in that company is around like responsible HR, hiring, recruiting. And what we do is, based on the criteria that any company or organization puts in, it gives not a ranking, but a rating on how well, it's like a matching test of like how well something like a candidate and their resume and their profile matches to what you want. And it tells you the matched versus actually evaluating and making those kinds of decisions. And it presents those matches to a hiring manager and says, hey, based on you saying you need someone who's good at data processing and has 15 years of experience and XYZ, this matches. And what it also does, it takes like proxies into account where it says, oh, you might say that you want someone from this region, but do you really mean this? Or like someone in this region might imply this. And it brings in these other proxies and details that you might not know. So it's a matching versus an evaluation, if you will, and is a tool to help hiring managers and recruiters understand how a candidate matches to what you put into the system.
And that matching evaluation, does it then afterwards also evaluate if it was biased in its matching? Like you just said, you also have a system to check the system. You just, do you do that as well?
Yeah. So you can go, let's say a hiring manager goes in and you're like, so the matching it gives a rating of A, B, C, D. Yeah. And the hiring manager can go and be like, oh, I didn't realize that, I put in 3 years of experience, and it turns out that like in the last decade, I'm making this up, in the last decade, a bunch of early grads took like a gap year or two, and like they actually need like 5 or 6 years or something. And you can adjust based on that. So it's very still hands-on.
Yeah, but just, you said the machine,
you
need to have the machine also evaluate the bias of the machine, right? Like you just said before, like you have the machine check, have another machine check the output to make sure that it's not, are you doing that as well? Because the evaluation is also, could also be biased.
That part, not, right now it's the focus on people checking the machine and not another system checking the system to see if there is bias in the
And that leads me to a question I really want to ask you as well. Okay. And it's a difficult one, maybe. I don't know if it is, but let's see. How do we avoid making humans the culprits for machine errors, right? When the machines are too complex for us to fully grasp. I think someone like Robert Fuchs in an earlier episode spoke about the human crumple zone, where we put humans in front of machines to sort of take the hit when they make a mistake. So you say, oh, but you reviewed it, so now it's your fault. But I didn't know. I was reviewing 100 applicants, and the AI said that these were, but it only took, Caucasian white males, right, from Denmark. But now it's my fault because I was supposed to evaluate it. And then you fire him and you keep the system.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. I think about this all the time because it brings me back to when, just like the days of, it's like the same for me as saying, if someone, like people who use the systems, it's on them to understand everything about the system. So it's like the same people like, well, if someone was fooled by something online, it's their fault. I'm like, no, it's like you made it so complicated that they didn't really understand it to begin with, right? So that's like in our personal lives. If someone's like, well, they couldn't identify or figure out how to use that, it's their fault. I'm like, no, that's like, it's not the human machine. It's like you're by design, that was not good. Like your design was not good enough.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to this, comes back to like, I know we talked about AI in the loop, but like in the common space of like the humans in the loop, it's where's the person in the loop and to what extent are they responsible for the outcome of the product, right? Yeah. And is it the company or the individual, and like who takes culpability, to your point, and I think there's a multi-tier answer to that. One, we have to design systems for which if the system has an output that influences your decision making, the design itself has to make it clear enough so that you know what you're doing. So I think that's on the companies. And that could mean adding just the right amount of friction in the tool where you ask like you have a prompt, or you like highlight, FYI, this is what like this result was trained on. Like there's a number of that. Like there's also fatigue of like, if you give too many notices, people don't pay attention anymore, right? Yeah, so like, exactly. Again, that's like a design problem. It's like in electronic health records where nurses ended up overdosing patients because they got tired of notifications that said you're giving too much medication. And like, they just started ignoring it because the notifications were wrong. So I think one, it's like just on baseline, the design of any system that gives results for which someone has to make a decision from the results, there should be design and clarifications of what they're doing. Another part of that is if you're an entity that buys tools where you give to your frontline workers or your employees that are not in positions of power up here, there's also a training component. It's like saying, it's like you wouldn't put someone in the factory line to use a tool to assemble a car without training them on how those tools work, right? So they would know that like, if two parts weren't put together right, they know what to do. Like you would train them to some extent.
But we always sort of underinvest there, right? Don't we? People always underinvest a little bit on training, right? And
correct.
It's just a default there.
I think with software, it can seem so easy to adopt versus like using a machine that puts two car parts together. Yeah. Like it becomes like, oh, I'll just give it to you to use, which is okay for some tools, but for others, perhaps with higher ambiguity and higher risk, there's just more training there to begin with. And then I think it becomes a question of company values of, if somebody uses the tools that you make them use or you buy for them and you encourage them to use it and the tool itself is not the right fit and you have a bad outcome later, are you going to put it on your employee? Are you going to put it on your vendor? Or are you going to take that as a leader of your organization? And I think that what we see is it's a different answer for different companies or different values. Some will take the heat as a leader. Some companies will put it on their employees and some will hold their vendors accountable. And I think that's the space to where you're seeing it for different use cases and you're seeing it for different values for different companies as well.
It's extremely difficult and also slightly unfair question. I know that, Kathy. I think you answered it very well.
It's a great question because I think it's a difficult one, but it's one that's constantly being discussed, right?
Yeah,
like when you use a piece of technology, when you drive a car, when you're like, and it's something that's actively litigated. Like if something happens in the car, who's at fault? Like, well, if there's a known bug in the car, maybe the car manufacturer's at fault.
Yeah, but
if there's nothing.
But to me, this question is just so much to move fast and break things. But it's an unknown move fast and break things because people aren't even aware they're doing that because so many companies right now are saying, let's put this AI in, and then say, how do we evaluate if it's good enough? We just let a human evaluate it. And that's the standard answer. So many places right now, and that is a move fast and break things thing because, as you said, it's about making the right design for this, so you avoid making the human the culprit for things they couldn't possibly know. And what do we do about accountability in the future in general, right? Where at some point someone over here in another department, he changes a small prompt that changes an agent in a chain, and someone else changes it over here, small prompt in the same chain, and you get a extremely malevolent outcome, but none of them were responsible for either. And the system on a whole is just who and what and why. And it's not on you because you didn't change those two prompts, but these two people had no clue.
But you get to a great point of just also, this is systems engineering. And we're seeing this fall on chief information officers too, where you're like in charge of, or somebody needs to have to see all the pieces.
Yeah.
Because to your point, like somebody can change maybe like some security setting or just some prompt over in this section of their world and they think it's fine. And then but then when all those pieces come together, they just stop working.
Yeah.
Or they cause even worse, a more malevolent outcome. But systems, I like to, whenever I get into a moment of, oh no, what are we going to do next? I like to think a lot about, well, where else can we find lights in history? But like system design, systems engineering, having someone who's in charge of making sure like an architect, the end-to-end pieces work, those are also not new concepts. They're sometimes not prioritized when you're moving fast, to your point about moving fast. But these are not new. Like companies, at least in different pockets of the world or in history, have examples of where someone is in charge, or maybe a team is in charge of like the end-to-end execution, at least well-run ones, right? Yeah. So let's like bring that in of, let's make sure someone understands the whole end-to-end process, because otherwise you're going to break something.
But this is super, because now you're increasing complexity. And I always think whenever some new technology comes out, some new hype technology, we think the world will be simpler tomorrow. The thing that always happens is increased complexity with a higher output, which is just a different trade-off, right? But simplicity, that's not part of the game, isn't it, Kathy?
I think that is what we strive for.
Yeah.
I think it ends up, I do think there is a genuine desire and strive, because I feel this on my teams, right? Of it's messy and complicated. We don't want to just be, if you think of like a giant architecture, we don't want to be just like one more piece that connects in, that claims to simplify everything. We want to help think through like, how do we get rid of and clean up some of the components and be more simple? I do think that's what a lot of companies, startups, people really are genuinely striving. Like, and I think part of the hype is hype, but part of it's like this hope of,
Yes.
oh, what if it could be like we've gotten ourselves into such a mess with so many systems. It really feels like this can simplify.
Hype is hope, and death is dream, and we can go on, right?
So I do think that there is like, I do think there'll be pockets where things get more simple and feel more simple. And I think AI has the ability to be a layer on top of complicated systems that we've built for so long. And then in the process, we might find areas while we use it to declutter and make things easier. And I don't think we've figured out exactly what that is yet. So part of it is going to keep talking and trying. But I do think like the promise of things being simpler is very real. At least feeling simpler. The back end connecting systems together might get more complicated, but it feeling simpler for the front end where we use those systems, I think that promise is real.
I always, you may, in my mind, I'm going back to the vinyl thing, right? And all this whole, it seems simple, but then we end up getting picky, right? I said this before, 3 years ago, I was like, oh, this output from ChatGPT is so amazing. And now I'm like, oh, this is such a terrible output. And it's way better than 3 years ago, right? And you're like, oh, just understand what I'm trying to get you to do.
Or you're trying to keep editing. Yeah. But here's another example. I was spending time with some doctors and speech pathologists, and they... of all of the different advancements in healthcare, there's been some really interesting, incredible ones with like discoveries of medicines and things like that. Something that has really taken the field by storm is the ability to do ambient note taking, which is the ability to, for it to be in the room, capture all the details and put them into notes after. And the reason that has become so critical is that there used to be a world where doctors just sat with patients, talked, took notes, wrote them down, and then electronic health records came in to the fold. And then what ended up happening is doctors talk to patients. At the end of the day, they're now trying to go back and transcribe all of their notes for like hours. And then this thing comes along and it's like, all right, what's this whole process? Okay, so you're already taking notes. What if you capture it right then and there, put it into the right fields in the electronic record system, summarize it, and at the end of the day, it's on it. So that's where I think of that particular example a lot because it understood the process and then it really did simplify. And that's possible in other spaces too. Like in some ways, it might feel like we're adding all these, but in other ways, it's like, oh, we added all these steps, but now we'll take those away because the machine is just going to take your notes, put it back into the machine, and do it as you go. And, now you don't have an increased step.
And now you're ending us back on the first thing we spoke about, the friction and the friction that we don't need. And this is not the doctor sitting in the evening, writing down his notes, and he forgot half of what he actually spoke to them about. That's a bad friction, and he's not spending time with his family either.
Yeah.
Oh, she's not spending time with her family.
Friction, right? Like sometimes you have friction that you might...
The doctor's always a man. Sorry about that. She's not spending time with her family.
And she can spend more time. And that's an example of friction created because of technology. Because we had electronic health record systems, we now need them to enter the information. But this is an example of the technology reducing the friction. So I think finding examples like that where we can simplify, they exist.
That's
and there are also examples where things get more complicated. But like, I think about that as my guiding light a lot, where it's like, oh, we've introduced technology that overcomplicate our lives. Let's like figure out a way where it actually cuts out the complexities that we introduced to begin with and reduce the right kind of friction.
Kathy, I've really, really enjoyed this conversation, and it's I think I've taken you far and wide, and also been, I think you've been a splendid guest, and I want to just ask you very quickly about what the future holds before we get to the final question, because I want to just know from you, and with all your experience and all your engagements right now, both at Workday, also as a Harvard Fellow, and what you've been doing with the government, all the policies you've been involved in, all the things you've been involved in. What does the future hold? What do you think the future holds?
Yeah. Well, first, you're a great host. Thank you. And I do think the future will go back to what we were actually talking about. I know we were talking about the AI you don't see. And I had mentioned, well, there are some cases you want to see the AI because it's there. But I actually think the future is one where the AI is now absorbed back into what we just call technology.
Yeah.
And then we can all focus back on what are the problems that we're trying to solve for, what are the advances I want to make.
I want to say amen, Kathy.
Yeah, let's talk about advancing cancer research without bringing up AI all the time.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how do we help people move around in a company for roles that are the best fit for them without being like, oh, and that's powered by AI.
Yes.
Right? Like it becomes like this tool that we're so used to having in our toolbox that we're not always like, here's our new toy, everyone. I want you to know I'm using it. And it's like, oh, it's there. And then we focus back on the problems that we're solving for. And I do think the future will get there.
I need to get you in a church to say this because this is, this is the congregation stuff, right? I actually just wrote this in an article as my hope and prediction for 2026 and 2027 that we stop talking so much about it and start talking about problems, start talking about because technology instead of talking about AI, start talking about solutions and problems instead of, right? Sell me the problem, don't sell me the AI, right? I think.
Well, and it still is just. AI is a big part of things, but if you look at the technology, so like software development, all those infrastructure and all those parts are just as critical as the AI part. Yeah. It just happens to dominate the whole of the conversation in a lot of spaces. But
people are like, show me the AI. What can I do with AI? I'm like, hey, tell me what are your problems? What are you working on? Let me figure out if AI is the right fit, or maybe you just need this integration over here. Anyway, Kathy, I've really loved having you here, and I have one final question for you. And you told me actually that you've spent some of your extremely valuable, expensive time and sparse time as well thinking about this, waking up at night thinking, what will I answer this question? So I'm actually very excited to hear your answer to it. And are you ready for it?
Yes.
So Kathy Pham, what is the only constant?
Our only constant is, for me, us and our human agency. And what I mean by that is things around us will keep changing. The technology will keep changing. The technologies that are presented to you, whether you like it or not, are changing. Your political climates are changing. But at the end of the day, how do we as individuals, regardless of how much power we have, regardless of where we are in the world, how do we execute? Like, the constant is our ability to just make a decision on what we do. Sure, there are some factors that can point us to do something a certain way, but our agency on taking action for our own actions and where we go, how much tooling we use, how much technology we bring into our homes, how much technology we bring into our workplaces, how much AI we use, how much we use the technology to make decisions or not. It comes back down to our human agency that we all always have, regardless of where we are in the world, the power we have, and where we are. And it goes back to what I tell my kids: we can't always control what people say or do around us, but you have full control over how you react to it. And I recognize that sometimes there are situations where might not be in control as much because there are power factors at play. But I'll hold to the fact that our human agency and the power we have as like an individual in this world today is something that is a forever constant in our lives.
And that's why we need to speak about the purpose of what we want to use our agency for as well. Right, Kathy?
Yeah.
We've gone full circle, Kathy.
Full circle. Lots more conversations about our purpose in life, our purpose in our actions, and how that drives us to do what we do. Yeah.
I've loved this conversation, Kathy. Thank you so much for being here with me on The Only Constant. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. Likewise, it's been a great pleasure.
Thank you for listening. If you liked this episode, share it with a friend or a colleague.